This is sort of a deep cut.
It is a beyond deep cut.
When we're talking about these plugged-in rewind features that we've been doing, we typically go back in time, look at a classic movie from times gone by, talk about the art of the movie, talk about maybe some spiritual content that we might find there.
Yep.
There's a lot of things that we try to do with these, but this is probably the one that I would guess would be most likely not watched by a lot of our folks out there. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair. This is a movie that came out in 1986. I did not see it back in the day. I didn't see it till many years later. I think calling it a deep cut is an accurate description. This is a profound movie.
Well, and that's one of the things, right? I think that when we're looking at a deep cut, one of the reasons why we chose this movie is because there is a lot to talk about.
Yes.
A lot.
And we're going to talk about that today. And that's really our goal with the Plugged In Rewind series, is to take movies that have something to say, some of which have been big blockbusters. This one is a little bit off the beaten path, so to speak, and really unpack them in a way that goes deeper, perhaps, than our written reviews do. We love movies. We love talking about the ideas in them.
Right.
And so we just want to share some of those conversations. And as always, we would encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you know when the next one of these is going to show up.
The other thing that we should also mention is that the movies that we have on here are not always family friendly.
Right.
We have actually done an R-rated movie in this series. This is a PG movie, but this has some definite content issues that we will get into.
It does.
So
in and of itself, it's an interesting sort of case study in what the rating does and doesn't tell you.
Well, that's exactly right. And so I'm sure that by the time this is up, we're going to have our own very own plugged-in review that you will be able to look at to look for any content concerns that there might be there.
Yep. So, Paul.
Yes.
The mission.
The mission.
What's the basic story here? I'm going to let you kick it off, and I'll play color commentary, because there are a lot of facts, and there are enough facts that if I have to cheat and look at my phone just to verify, please don't think less of us.
So, The Mission, 1986. It stars Jeremy Irons, Robert De Niro. It is based loosely on a true story. And essentially what you have here, it's about 1740, 1750.
1750, I think, is the date they give. See, I'm already correct.
Look at you.
I'm sorry.
Look at you. Man, oh man, I can't even get through a sentence. But you do have these Jesuit missionaries. The very first scene, you see...
Where are they?
They are in Paraguay, what is now Paraguay. At the time of the movie, this was Spanish territory, but as we will see in the movie, the Portuguese have sort of moved into their territory. There's a treaty that's been signed between Spain and Portugal.
And the church is involved too.
And the church is involved too. And why is the church involved? Because there are some missions, obviously. We're talking about the mission. There are some missions that have sheltered a lot of the native population of this area. The Spanish do not take slaves. The Portuguese do. Officially, that's correct. The Portuguese do. So for the Portuguese, this area is prime slaving territory. They will come in and they will take portions of the native population and take them and ship them off to slaving markets all over the new and old world. So that's sort of the backdrop, which we don't necessarily get a full understanding until much later on in the movie.
Yep.
Now, this has been going on for a while, but you also have some untouched people who live above, quote unquote, above the falls. There's these spectacular waterfalls that we see. And these people have been largely untouched.
Meaning that they haven't had contact with any
European settlers.
Or those that they've had, they have killed.
Well, and that's the opening scene. It's one of the most dramatic opening scenes that you will see in a movie to this day, I think. We see that there was a missionary who came up there. The
Jesuit.
The people did not particularly want him there. So they
let him know.
They let him know. They tied him to a cross and sent him down the falls. Oddly enough, this did not stop the missionaries from coming, and we see one of our primary characters, Father Gabriel, comes up.
He's played by Jeremy Irons.
Jeremy Irons, he comes to this area and he says, I sent this man I am the one who needs to reach these people.
I sent him, Father. I have to go up there myself.
Yes.
So he goes up and he tries to, he climbs up the falls. He plays the clarinet.
Oboe.
Oboe. Oboe?
It's an oboe.
Really? Okay. He plays the oboe, and the people are intrigued and bring him into this environment. And then later on, we meet the other primary person
This
of
guy
this story.
with the sword.
Prime Robert De Niro. Do you want to talk about Robert De Niro?
Yeah. Robert De Niro plays a character named Rodrigo, and he is a mercenary.
Mendoza.
Rodrigo Mendoza. He is a pretty brutal man. He's a slave trader. He is a mercenary. He is full of himself, and he is a tragic character. And the woman he loves ends up choosing his younger brother over him, and she makes him swear that he won't hurt his brother, and he swears that he won't. And then after he catches them in bed together, which is, we don't see anything, but it's pretty clear what's happening.
Yep.
He stabs his younger brother.
Yeah.
He kills his brother.
Yeah.
And because it is couched as a duel, he does not suffer a legal consequence for it. But it's clear that he is imprisoned by his own guilt. Mm-hmm. And he actually is practically in a prison. He's staying in what's essentially a cell for months, and he won't speak to anybody. And at that point,
Father Gabriel,
thank you, goes to try to coax him out of his grief and his guilt.
There is a way out, Mendoza.
And it really is, he is imprisoned by guilt and shame. You get the sense that his regret has crippled him utterly.
Right, and I think that this is as good a point as any to really dive into some of the spiritual components of this movie, because that's really what comes next.
Well, and let me say too, this is a movie that is both very plot heavy, it's character development heavy, and it's thematically heavy. Like, we're probably going to talk a bit, although I think we've done a pretty good job of sort of laying it out.
Yeah. That's the bare bones structure.
There are
right
a ton of things happening in this movie, and it's the kind of movie you could watch a couple of times and maybe understand it better upon subsequent viewings. Yeah. But
Go
ahead.
One of the things that I love about this movie, and one of the reasons why we chose it for this particular feature, is because it has so much overt spiritual heft. Like, you sometimes kid me about reading, spiritual messages into these movies, and I kind of do, right? But this one, you don't need to read into anything.
No. It's the core of the movie.
This is as a Christian, a secular movie as you may see.
Yes.
And it gets to the heart of the Mendoza character.
Yeah.
He is, as you say, imprisoned by his own guilt. He really feels like he is not worth anything. He tells Gabriel, he comes down from the falls periodically because he's sort of in charge of a lot of these missions, right?
He's like a regional
dog.
manager.
He is a regional manager. That's exactly right. He comes down. This father of this church says, I think you're the only person who can reach Mendoza.
I have a task for you, and I think you're the only one who can do it.
And so Gabriel comes in, and Mendoza is a very proud individual. Rodrigo Mendoza is extraordinarily proud. And there's a line where he says, Mendoza gets very angry at Father Gabriel because he makes just sort of an offhand comment, and he reaches out. And this is Robert De Niro. He is a scary individual. Even though he's like 105 now, he's still a very intimidating individual. And
Robert, if you're listening, we know, and watching, we know that you're only 95.
But he grabs Father Gabriel by the lapel, and he says, "Are you laughing at me?"
Yeah.
And Gabriel says, "I am laughing at you."
Are you laughing at me? I'm laughing at you.
Because what I find here is laughable.
Yeah. And he calls him a coward.
Calls him a coward. This guy who clearly has probably killed more people than his brother. He's done some terrible things. He knows his way around a gun and a sword. He calls him a coward, and he encourages him to seek redemption. And Mendoza says, there is no redemption for me. And Gabriel says, but would you dare try it? And what Rodrigo Mendoza decides to do is he goes with Father Gabriel to these hitherto unreached people above the falls, the Guarani, who he had just started hunting as slaves.
He'd been capturing them as slaves, and
so
he's probably killed some of them.
They are well aware of who this guy is. His penance is to drag all the accoutrements of his past life, armor, swords, all this sort of stuff in this huge bag, drag them across the Paraguayan jungle, crawl up the falls, go to the Guarani. And it is one of the most powerful scenes in the entire movie when you see the end of that.
I was trying to think of another movie short of something as literal as like Pilgrim's Progress, right? Where you get a visual representation of carrying your sin. Because it's clear that he feels bad about himself. It's clear that there is a kind of self-flagellation going on. What's unclear is what is going to release him from the burden. And at one point, because they're climbing these falls that are hundreds of feet high, and he's dragging this, 200 pounds of armor behind him, and the priests they're mad at him. Because he's slowing them all down. And so one of the priests cuts the rope, he climbs back down, reties it, and starts climbing again. And so what happens at the top is pretty interesting.
It's really interesting. I just wanted to park on that just for a little bit because I think that's so telling when we talk about the grace of God, speaking into our own sin. God will forgive us of our sins. It is a free gift. But emotionally, mentally, I don't think we're really in a position to accept that. Always, and I think that we do feel the need for us to feel like it's earned. We need to pay a price for it.
Absolutely. This is a case study in redemption and the cost of redemption. And what becomes apparent is very literally this is a burden he is incapable of carrying. And I love, there's so much metaphor. Like you could preach 10 sermons on those scenes.
Absolutely.
Right? Of his stoic, he is determined to punish himself. And he won't.
And it's not the priests who are punishing him.
No, they think it's ridiculous. And the main priest, what's his name? Gabriel? Sorry. The main priest, Gabriel, really is actually letting him do this. Like he's not trying to short circuit the process, which I thought was incredibly wise.
Well, and you see him talking. Another Oscar winner, both Jeremy Irons and Robert De Niro have won Oscars. We also see a very young Liam Neeson.
He's like 13.
Not that young.
He's probably 20.
But he's one of the fathers here. He's one of the priests, and he goes up to Father Gabriel.
He doesn't know he's going to be a Jedi yet.
Perhaps I killed a Jedi and took it from him.
He doesn't know. He doesn't know that he's going to have a certain set of skills.
I had to get Star Wars in here somewhere.
I know. But you do have Liam Neeson, the priest he plays, goes up to Father Gabriel and says, he's done this enough. Rodrigo's has done this enough. It's time to let this go. And Gabriel says, but he doesn't think so.
He's done this penance long enough. And, well, the other brothers think the same.
But he doesn't think so, John.
And then he says something pretty interesting, and frankly, neither do I. Because I do think that there is certainly again, the mystery of grace is so powerful, and we know that is a free gift.
Yeah.
And yet,
we have to get to the end of ourselves.
we have to get to the end of ourselves. That's exactly right.
Like
That's a
the
good
prodigal son, some of us have to be in the pig slop. Some of us have to come to our senses in the hardest possible journey.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And I don't want to spoil the particulars, but there's an encounter at the top that becomes a catalyst for his willingness to let it go. And then
Yeah.
he becomes a different person. Like, after that surrender, the transformation is staggering.
Because he went through that penance,
Yeah.
because he had that cathartic moment at the end, which is one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most moving scenes.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Oh my goodness.
But you'll have to watch the movie.
so
We're not going to spoil it,
beautiful.
probably. Maybe later, but not
Maybe.
now.
Although they might throw in a clip right here.
Right. Right? Exactly.
You never know. But it is
Who are
so
they and
powerful.
where do they get their clips?
We don't ask, we just talk.
These
We
videos just
talk.
come into existence on their own.
But you do have that really cathartic moment, and the idea that you needed to go through that process. I mean, in some ways, it is a little like what you talk about addicts or whatnot who really need to hit rock bottom before they can see a way out.
Yeah.
And you see that in Mendoza.
And nobody else can do it for him.
Nobody else
The
can
priest
do it.
tries to short circuit the process, and Gabriel says, no, he's not done yet.
Well, and here's the thing. It's very biblical. We are a
Right.
stiff-necked people.
Yeah.
And we have to learn these painful, painful lessons on our own sometimes because we're stupid. That's the real truth of it. We are stupid. We have a hard time accepting our frailty. We have a hard time accepting that we need to be humble before Christ.
And I'm going to take an absurd detour for just a moment.
Imagine.
But one of my favorite short videos, it's all over, pick your platform.
Yeah.
Instagram, TikTok, is the caption is something like actual footage of Jesus forgiving me from my sins or releasing me from my sins, and this farmer pulls a sheep out of a ditch and the sheep jumps in a circle and jumps right back in the ditch. And that's the way of it, right? We are a stiff-necked people.
Yeah.
And I laugh every time because that's us.
It's so true.
And Rodrigo's, back to the movie, Rodrigo's humanity, he had to go through that before he was able to receive the grace. And then it's almost like we begin another movie at that point. Like
It really is. That would be a beautiful Christian movie,
Right.
ending it right there.
And that's where a good normal Christian movie would end. This one is not that. And things get more interesting, I think.
Yeah,
Tragic.
The more we talk about this, the more I think we're going to have to spoil some stuff. We
Yeah.
won't spoil that scene because when we're talking about sort of the complexity that the rest of the movie sort of unfolds,
Yeah.
it is difficult, and we have to hit to the very end of the movie.
We have to.
And it really is in some ways a tragedy.
It absolutely is. And yet the opposite of a tragedy.
And yet
there's
the opposite
glory,
of
right?
It's so interwoven,
Yeah.
because what you have here, we set this up a little bit before where we're talking about Spain, Portugal, the church. These are three major players within what is going on outside the jungle.
Yeah.
Inside the jungle, you have Rodrigo Mendoza. He has become a changed man.
And become
He
a
has
Jesuit.
He becomes a Jesuit. He renounces. There's a scene where he's given an opportunity to even kill a pig. The hunters want him. They've really embraced him as one of their own. They want him the honor of killing this pig. He refuses to do it because...
Which is an important scene given what happens later.
Exactly. So he refuses to do that. He clearly has changed. And there's some beautiful moments where he's reading the scriptures and it unpacks Paul's love, famous love passage. It's just a gorgeous scene. But outside this Eden-like world.
Which they refer to it that way more than once. It's Edenic.
You have the political machinations.
Machinations.
Thank you. You know, I never say that right on this show.
It's machinations. Think
Thank you.
machine, not mechanized.
Whatever. Machinations. So you have these machinations.
Think mac and cheese. Only
I'll remember that. But you have these political forces that are pushing and pulling in a different sort of way.
Yeah.
And Portugal is going to be taking over, or Portugal wants to take over.
I demand an apology.
Right.
Some of these missions.
So they can take all of these beautiful tribal people and enslave them.
That would be the end result, right? For some reason, there's a prominent bishop who comes, and he is supposed to be one of the people who is deciding the fate of this, deciding whether he will sign off on this.
Right. And there's pushback because the Jesuits have a reputation of
ignoring authority,
doing their own thing and not
Right.
being under authority. And the conflict he is in is he wants to not have that outcome. He's afraid that if he doesn't cave in, that what's going to happen is that the Jesuit order will be wiped out everywhere. And so even though in some ways he comes across as momentarily courageous and perhaps cowardly in the end, he's also put in this horrible position of having to choose between two horrible outcomes.
Right. And it is a profound study of the purity of faith.
Yeah.
And the reality of politics.
Yep.
In some ways, you know, and that's one of the most powerful themes here. You have these forces that are at work, that are pushing against what the bishop really feels is the true will of God in some ways.
Right.
You know, because he sees these missions, he is taken to some of them below the falls, and there's some beautiful scenes.
And music plays a huge role.
Oh
too,
my goodness,
right?
the music is
they
fantastic.
They make instruments. They have almost like orchestras, and they sing, and so this bishop and other people get to hear these, you know, native tribesmen creating this beautiful, stunningly beautiful music. And the point of the movie, or one of the points, is they're not savages.
Right.
That they're fully and completely human, and they deserve the dignity and sanctity of that.
Right. And one of the things that I really appreciated about this movie is that it's the church defending their humanity. Now, we have seen other movies that would suggest...
parts of the church.
Parts of the church.
And that's complicated too, right?
It's really complicated, but you do see this, especially Father Gabriel. He becomes truly a father to these people.
Yep.
And even as a Spanish governor tries to say, these people are they are subhuman, they are evil, they kill their children. You know, all this sort of stuff. It is Father Gabriel who literally raises a child up to stand, you know, before the bishop to show the humanity. And I love that sort of tension within the film, you know, that you have. And I love the fact that Father Gabriel feels like he is a representation of the church in its purest form. He is
peace and love,
incorruptible.
Yeah.
And all the other forces around him are in some ways corrupted.
Yes and no. So as we move toward the outcome, the decision is made that the territory is going to be given to Portugal. And what that means is that the missions are going to be burned to the ground, basically. They want to send the tribesmen back.
They're no longer safe.
They're no longer safe.
These missions have been like these places of refuge.
They've been a total refuge. And so the priests and the people know that the Portuguese soldiers are coming for them. And that leads to what I think is the story's last major conflict, which is what is the right thing to do? And so Father Gabriel in his purity says, we are men of peace and love. We cannot do anything other than represent these people. And Rodrigo's transformation is such that he loves them so deeply that for him, the only possible outcome is he has to defend them. And I think the movie presents them as both decisions driven by faith.
Yeah.
And in a way that it's really ethically, what's the right thing here?
Yes and no. I'll go back to that.
Okay.
Because you're absolutely right. I do think it presents this really powerful tension. And I think for Christians, it's a really healthy tension to grapple with, the idea of the peace and love of Father Gabriel, that let's stand up for what you believe in with Rodrigo. But at the same time, there's a really interesting bit of symbolism, right? Because when it comes time to where there's going to be a clash, fighting the Portuguese forces, saving these people's lives, a Guarani, he's one of the native, a boy who's really attached himself to Rodrigo, he dives in, and the metaphorical sin that he had been dragging up the falls, he fishes that out, cleans off the sword, hands it over to Rodrigo. So you do have this element of sacrifice, and there is a certain purity and righteousness about it. And yet the movie does hint that he's dragging up his old life, he's dragging up his old sin.
Or is it being redeemed? Like, I think you could argue it either way, and I was an English major because there's no right answer. I didn't like algebra and calculus because there was only one right answer and I had to show my work. I think that is an interpretation. I think you could interpret it that that there is a redemption of that former life too. And certainly Gabriel's pure-hearted, stoic sacrifice is moving. But ultimately, a number of the priests follow Rodrigo. And they all end up, sorry, spoiler alert. They all die. I mean, the ending is not happy, except that we see a small group of survivors who seem potentially willing to carry on.
And another couple of interesting points with that, because you are absolutely right. I think that's one of the beauties of this movie, is it's really open to interpretation.
There's a lot of ambiguity here.
And you can have a really healthy conversation about what this means, what is really going on here, what you take away from it. Because I think that this is the type of movie that it's a yes and. It wraps all of these things together. But one of the most beautiful scenes in the movie, I think, is when you see Mendoza. He is in the middle of the battle, and he has the ability to blow up a bridge or something, to kill lots of Portuguese, perhaps save the village, whatnot. He sees these little boys, and he sees one of them shot. And he has a choice between pulling a trigger or saving the boy. He saves the boy, and that loses the trigger eventually for them. That was a profound statement that, this guy, he might have picked up his sword again, but at the same time, he truly was changed by his experience.
I don't feel like when he makes the decision to defend the people, it doesn't feel in the context of the story like he's backsliding. It feels like a pure statement of his newfound faith in God, that in that moment, for him, the right thing is to defend those who are powerless. And as much as we talk about the absolutes of right and wrong in Scripture, sometimes there are these ethical case studies where, especially in the context of war, what is the right thing? And we see that his life has been so transformed that he is absolutely willing to lay down his life in defense of these people, as is Gabriel. In a totally different way.
And one of the things that I really enjoy about this movie is the fact that, Gabriel, he is sort of the standard bearer, almost literally. for peace and love, for Christ turning the other cheek, all that kind of stuff. He is also, I would argue, the bravest character in the entire movie. because he stands up to Rodrigo, and when you see him marching, which he knows is going to be
he marches
his
straight
end,
into death, basically.
without flinching, carrying the cross, marching straight out where he knows he is spending his last seconds alive. And that is a really powerful scene. And it's fascinating because in that scene you see Rodrigo watching him.
Yes. He's mortally wounded at that point.
Mm-hmm.
He's barely hanging on.
Barely hanging on. And you can see him in his dying moments rooting for him to make it somewhere. And then when he sees Gabriel fall,
yeah, it's his permission to let go.
yeah. But then, and this is
And another thing,
because when you see Gabriel fall, someone else picks up the cross.
No, that's the thing, it's one of the people that he has served.
Yeah.
You know, it's not another priest.
Right.
And you get the sense that what's the saying, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church.
Yeah.
That may not be quite right, but
it's close.
It seems like these people have fully understood and embraced the Christian faith, which is part of the horrific tragedy.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is tragic on just about every level.
So many levels.
By the time you get to the end, but at that point in history, just different parts of the church slaughtering other parts, and they had no ability to think outside of the political and financial considerations.
Well, and
the bad guys. I mean.
I think that is a cautionary element for Christians of every age, right? Because we can be lured by the attraction of the world.
Power.
We can be lured by power, whether it's and that draw is strong and that draw is real, and we think that by grasping at that power, we can make changes, and maybe we can, but at the same time, that power truly does corrupt. And
right, at what cost?
At what cost? And one of my...
You have a lot of favorites.
I have a lot of favorites.
Paul actually has 14 scenes in this movie that are his favorite.
I should really just stop saying that. But at the end of the movie, you have the bishop who has been struggling with the weight of his decision. He reads accounts of the atrocities that have taken place.
And he weeps. I mean, or there's a tear anyway. Weeps maybe is too strong.
There is a Portuguese person who is fairly sympathetic. He knows that this is a tragedy. He knows that it's striking the bishop, and he says, essentially, we have to work in the world.
Right. What are you going to do?
The world is thus.
Yep.
And then the bishop says, no, thus we have made the world.
Thus have we made the world. Thus have I made it.
Yeah. Woo. Now, it is, it's not an easy movie to watch.
No.
I invited my wife to watch it with me, and she said, I don't want to watch that depressing movie. And, she works in a church. So just know that you have to have a fairly high tolerance for just about as far from a Hollywood ending as you're ever going to get.
There is hope at the end of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost an echo back to the very first scene where we see the missionary go down the falls.
Yep.
Because we see the hope within the people. And I actually did a little bit of research after watching the movie. Apparently, 250 years later, the areas where the Jesuit missionaries were most active, where those missions were present, the education level is higher among the Guarani to this day.
Wow. The Jesuits are known for really prioritizing education.
Correct. And this is really about the Jesuits in a way.
Yeah.
So you find that, again, in the midst of this darkness, you have this hope. And that's really kind of emblematic of the Christian faith itself.
Totally.
One thing that I wanted to bring out, and I didn't notice this until I watched it this time, the story feels like it's almost constructed as a Lenten journey, right? So let me explain.
Taking it to the next level. Paul Lacey, folks. It's a Lenten journey.
when you see Rodrigo
You're right.
Mendoza,
I totally know what you're saying.
Yeah, because when he kills his brother, he embarks on essentially this period of penance and redemption and contemplation of who he is and his relationship to God. We see that turnaround. Now, fast forward, you have a scene where the bishop, as he's visiting these missions, he walks on the fronds of the jungle plants they lay for him, which feels like a representation of Palm Sunday. Soon after that, he walks into these beautiful areas. It's almost just sort of like walking into the Holy Land, right? But as he walks in that moment of beauty, and it really is a moment of beauty, forces are at work to darken this moment. And eventually, I think it all leads up into...
To the sacrifice.
Exactly. The Good Friday of the battle, essentially. And then you have
Did you come up with this on your own?
I did. I'm sure someone else has thought of it too. But at the same
Paul
time...
Lacey, folks. It's amazing. I'm joking, but not. It's incredible.
But when you do have that battle sequence, then you see the horror, the death, the tragedy. But then you
and
feel
the wickedness of humanity.
The wickedness of humanity. And then you have the sunset later, where you know that there is hope impending. Yeah. And I love that.
Wow.
So
there's one other thing that we haven't really touched on at all, other than alluding to it briefly right at the beginning. Paul, do you want to talk us in on the National Geographic element of this movie that people need to be aware of?
So when
I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek.
But it's really there. So you do have, this is a PG movie, which shows you how different PG was maybe back in 1986 than it is now. There is a lot of nudity.
Tribal nudity.
Tribal nudity. Now, it's all done within the context. They're presenting this world as an Eden, where these unspoiled people are living, kind of in harmony with nature, right? So, but you do see definitely a lot of skin, and you see a lot of things, right? It's not hidden. It is very National Geographic, right?
Right.
You open it.
There's nothing sensual or tantalizing about it, but you also can't miss it.
Right.
And the camera doesn't single it out, but there are camera shots with multiple naked people in them. And in the very last scene, we
all
have
the kids are naked.
Some naked children, and some of them are probably pubescent. And we get really some full frontal nudity scenes of a boy and a girl. And actually, I don't think they could make the movie today. Honestly, I don't even think they could get away with filming that. I think that the cultural standards have changed enough that it wouldn't be allowable. But again, there's the purity and the innocence of their culture. Right.
It was done with an idea toward telling that story and to make it at least feel accurate to the time period that we're talking about. Right.
And I will say, the nakedness of the children at the end, I think, was very intentional on multiple levels. That the only ones that have survived are this small band of children, and they don't even have clothes left. But I think it also illustrates that on another level, maybe their innocence has not been completely taken from them. I think there are a number of things, because they were more naked in that scene than most of the rest of the movie, which is a funny thing to say. but you need to be aware of it, and
it's a violent movie too.
And it's the violence. There are a couple scenes that are really very disturbing, and there's the one scene with the couple in bed that I mentioned earlier.
Again, nothing is shown in that particular sequence, but there are content issues that you do need to be aware of if you dare to lean into this. The other thing, the thing that strikes me about this movie, though, is that it does press into some tender parts of our faith. The standard Christian movie today, I think, can sometimes make it feel as though, if you're Christian, you're good. This gets into a lot more complexity, a lot more depth, and a lot more, it can be discouraging, I think, for some who watch this. It can be challenging for some who watch this. For me, it presents a lot of things to really grapple with.
Well, and we haven't talked about it much, but there's a scene early in the movie where I think it's right after the initial priest died, and Father Gabriel is going out to the people, and he has basically nothing with him, and he's trying to climb this waterfall, and he's barefoot and muddy, and he falls, and he doesn't know what's going to happen, and just the level of single-minded devotion to, we are not going to let, this other person's death be in vain. It was my responsibility. Like, they sacrificed everything. When we talk about vows of poverty and, the vows that some of those Catholic orders take, we live in a culture of abundance and excess, and just, they didn't have anything. And they were still willing to give what little they had for the sake of the calling. And that is both inspiring and challenging and discouraging to me all simultaneously.
It's a beautiful movie in that, I think that the standard stance of most secular movies today would be, why spoil these people? Why bring in these influences? Why transform their culture? This movie hints at that, right? You do have, the bishop actually wonders whether maybe they wish that they had never come.
Right.
But
they even say they don't.
And that's the thing. This movie honors and respects the idea that God can be life-changing. We saw it in Mendoza. We saw it in the people sometimes that we come across, that the hope of God, the light of Christianity, truly is a hope and a light and a hope for life.
At one point, they say, well, you'll be free to go back to the forest. And the people say, we don't want to go back to the forest. This is our home. And there are just so many points in the movie that are poignant, that, you could pause it and have a conversation. I think that taking the content issues that we've talked about seriously, and they need to be at least thought through. If you watch this with your family, there may be a couple eyebrow-raising moments, right? But I think as a catalyst for conversation about the Christian life, about sacrifice, about redemption, about sin, about man's wickedness. Apparently, there's a Lenten journey in here. No, I'm only joking about it because I'm jealous that I didn't think of it. So just to be clear, man. They don't make movies like this anymore.
They don't make movies like this anymore. And I think this gets at one of the secret things that Plugged In tries to do, right? I think what we provide to families, what we provide to parents, we really mean that. We want people to take the content that they are going to be exposed to in movies seriously, because that can impact us. But at the same time, man, there are some really powerful messages in some difficult movies. And you need to weigh, in some ways, a little bit like the characters in this movie weigh, what the cost, the cost versus the value. And I think that the mission, if you can navigate some of these things, the value is pretty incredible.
I would agree with that. And I think that's probably an appropriate place to bring our conversation to a close, other than just reminding you that we would love to hear from you. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the notification bell so that you can always know when we have these new conversations up. We would love to be in conversation with you if you have seen the mission. We would also love to hear from you if you have other movies that you think would be worthy of a Plugged In Rewind conversation. Let us know in the comments below, and we'll consider that, and maybe we'll get to those in a future conversation. As always, Paul, this has been awesome.
This has been a lot of fun. These are fun conversations to have, whether they're huge blockbusters or whether they're movies that are a little bit forgotten, like The Mission. It's super fun to dig into this stuff. And we love for you to be along for the journey too.
So thanks for joining us, and be sure to check out all of our reviews at pluggedin.com. Rodrigo and Gabriel.
Rodrigo and Gabriel.